Hey everyone, thanks for joining me. Today we're out to talk about stripers. It may not look like the season, we're kind of getting to the end, but I had the chance to get my buddy Joe from Core Fishing on it. Joe, you and I you've been corresponding and supporting the channel for 2 or 3 years now. You're always sending in your reports, and I got to thank you for that, and I got to thank you for coming out here. And Joe is a local guy. He's a family man. He's a teacher, so he's got a 40-hour-a-week job. But somehow you have found a way to be extremely consistent when it comes to stripers, and not just catching schoolie-sized fish, but you're catching big fish. And I know you're not lying, because you're sending me pictures all the time. And you know, I'm seeing these 13, 14, 15, 20-pound fish. You're being extremely consistent with them. And we've talked about this. A lot of you guys said, get Joe on. I want to know what this sucker's doing, because I'm not doing that. So here we are. We're planning on doing a couple of striper videos. Now it's getting to the end of the season. You're kind of winding down on your striper fishing.
Yeah, most definitely. The striper season is pretty much over. There's still some schoolies in if you want to target them, but it's pretty much over.
What are your favorite months?
Well, when it comes to striper, if you don't know anything about the California Delta, we have 2 runs here. We have the spring and the fall run. Usually the fall run starts sometime around September, October time, and it runs till about December time. And if you talk about the spring run, you talk about February till about May. If I had to choose 1 month from the fall, usually the best striper fishing is around that November time. Usually the fish are in, they're eating very aggressively. And in the springtime, usually if I had to pick a month, I'd say April is that prime month that the stripers are in and they're feeding aggressively, they're up here spawning, and it doesn't seem like you could do wrong during those 2 months.
What temperature are you looking for out here?
I usually don't look at temperature so much, because stripers will eat in, 50-degree water, no problem.
So don't worry about temperature.
I wouldn't worry so much about temperature. It's more about whether or not the weather has been consistent during that time. The stripers always come in during the spring and they always come in during the fall, but usually that steady falling temperature or that steady rising temperature will bring the fish in heavy. Some years they come in earlier, some years they come in later. Sometimes people think it has to do with water temperature. I think it more has to do with stable temperature when the fish are ready to push in.
Do you use the same baits, or do you change baits for fall and spring?
Usually I throw the same striper baits. I only have a handful of baits. This season I probably kept the same 4 or 5 baits tied on my rod. I never really switched them out. I'm pretty confident in my baits. Striper baits aren't really a secret. People think there are some secret striper baits, but there really aren't. Okay,
so what we're getting right now is you don't have to, it's a lot of people may be overthinking this. You're using the same baits both year-round. You're waiting for water temperatures to stabilize, maybe hear a few fish come in that are in the system, then you can go out and start catching fish. So now when you're looking around, are you a bird watcher? Are you a tide watcher? Are you a guy what are you looking for if you're not grafting fish?
The biggest thing I found with striper fishing in particular is finding the fish. And a lot of the times we're in the Delta, we're fishing shallow water, so you won't be able to graft the fish most of the time.
Shallow meaning?
Shallow meaning I'm saying less than 5 or 7 feet of water, but most of the time I'm really targeting them in less than, I'd say, 3 or 4 feet of water.
And you're a guy that's throwing baits. You're not trolling. You're not live baiting. Yeah. So a lot of times I think that those guys may fish a little deeper out on the edge, but for what you're talking about, and I think what most people are interested in that watch this channel are going out with basically bass gear, throwing kind of bass type baits, and having these big stripers boil. So that's your deal. Fishing shallow water.
Yes.
2 to 7 feet.
Yeah, 2 to 7 feet, and I'm casting lures. I'm not jigging them in 20 feet of water. I'm not trolling for them. I'm not live baiting them or anything.
Everybody says fish cuts and points and things where you have visible current running through. Do you look at that current on the water visibly?
I do, and people try to say they have a favorite tide, but I have some spots, just like that would work better in high tide, and I have some spots that work better in low tide. You have to know where you're fishing. In some spots, I can go there on a low tide, there will be no water to fish. And some spots, I'll go there on a high tide, and my spot isn't fishable because it's too deep. But a lot of the times, these places that people hit, you just have to know your tides and know your spots and where you're going.
And unlike largemouth, I'm taking, you know, that may come into an area and hold in there and kind of live there. The stripers come in and they leave a lot quicker and more frequently during the season. So I'm taking that you may be rotating your spots just like you're fishing for bass. You don't come into one area, and a lot of times you might see these guys that are anchored up fishing with bait or whatever. They're sitting there for hours. You're moving around quite a bit.
I'm moving a lot. It's just the stripers are very nomadic. Where you find them, honestly, one day in the morning, they might not even be there an hour later. A lot of my times, the best bites I've ever gotten on, they only bite for a very short time. They're only here for a little bit and then they're gone. Like if I told you where I caught them today in the morning, you go there in that evening, they're probably not there already.
As you mentioned, morning and evening, those are always good times to be out here. How about for stripers? Is that a really, you know, if you're going to be hardcore, do you want to get out here at daybreak? Do you want to stay till the evening, number one? And how important is it during the day is a little breeze or cloud cover? You know, we think about that with largemouth bass all the time. When you're fishing stripers, is that important to get out in the morning and the evening and then look for that breeze, chase the breeze maybe?
I think the morning and the evening have the biggest compressed bite windows, whether it comes for any type of species in my experience. Stripers are the same. That early morning bite or that late evening bite is the biggest bite window that's consistent that you can catch fish on. And when you're coming out here, people, I think, get it wrong a lot of the times. People are coming out here when the sun's up and they think it's early, like 6 a.m. But I'm out here at 4 getting to the spot in the dark, and when the sun isn't even over the horizon yet and light's starting to shine, I'm already casting for these stripers. And the same thing for the evening. It's actually past the sunset when the sun isn't even showing anymore, and there's that very short 15-30 minute bite window. That's when the biggest stripers come out.
Does that sound familiar with what I talk about when it comes to bass quite a bit? So you got a bunch of baits. Why don't you go through those baits and talk, maybe go from small to big and talk about when you throw them and why you throw them, and when you throw a big bait, when you throw a small bait.
So we're going to talk about small baits first, and it's just like bass fishing or any fishing. If you use a small bait, you're targeting more fish, so you're going to get more bites more often than not. If you're only coming out here,
small baits. Before we go into a small bait, to you is how small, and a big bait is how big?
I'd say like a small bait is like a standard jerk bait, a 5-6 inch paddle tail, something like that.
All right, sorry to interrupt you on
No,
that.
you're good. So if you really just wanted to come out here and you've never caught stripers before, the two baits that I would recommend throwing is probably a jerk bait. Any standard jerk bait works. This is a Duo Realis. This is a 120 jerk bait. The jerk bait and a paddle tail swim bait, any paddle tail swim bait on a jig head will catch you a lot of fish. This is like the drop shot Senko of the striper world. If you throw these two, you'll catch a lot of fish. You're appealing to a lot of fish, and I know people catch big fish on this, but more often than not, I catch a lot of shakers and schoolie size on the jerk bait and paddle tail. These are your go-to if you're not catching fish.
Are those standard hooks on that?
Oh no, and no striper gear I fish the standard hooks. You can fish stock hooks if you want. I upgrade all hooks. Stripers.
I'll show this to these guys. Yeah, go ahead and keep talking.
Yeah, stripers, if you know, they bend hardware out no problem. Those are 2x strong hooks with owner hyperwire split rings. You have to upgrade your hooks if you're seriously targeting these stripers. It only takes a 5-pound striper to straighten out your stock hardware, so you upgrade hooks. Even on my paddle tails, I use a really heavy wire hook. This is I wouldn't say super heavy wire, but it's a heavier wire hook. And you can also throw your line throughs, like this is the Berkeley Coal Shad. This bait has been doing really good for me this year. But also the Mega Bass, what do they call that bait? The Mag Draft. That's a good bait too.
Now, I noticed on your head for that swim bait, do you have a specific head that you like to use? It looks like it's an oversized hook, and it looks like a 2 or 3X heavy.
Yeah, this is actually not even a freshwater jig head. This is the Strike King redfish or red something. It's a saltwater for redfish, I believe, and it's a heavier gauge hook because these stripers, they fight really hard, and you need a really heavy wire because they can straighten these things out no problem.
With those, what's the line you're using? What's the rod that you're throwing these smaller baits on?
These small baits, I usually throw this rod right here. I have a I have a popper rigged up on it right now. This is a Kuma TCS. This is a medium heavy rod with 15-pound mono line. A 6 or 7 gear ratio reel will do plenty well. This is my light striper rod. This will throw all these small baits, no problem. Usually I'm fishing this not around that much cover, usually more open water where I have a chance to fight a fish.
And how do you know when you're out there and you start off with these and you're picking up the Schoolies, I'll say 20 to 24 inches, if there's bigger fish in there, when do you start moving from that small bait to a bigger bait when you think there's bigger fish?
Usually speaking, the same size fish hang out with each other. So if you're catching a bunch of shaker stripers, chances are there's not that many even schoolie size fish in there. But once you start catching schoolies, I'll consider schoolies anything in the 3 to 8, 9 pound range. Usually those all fish stick together. I find that once you get into the bigger fish, I'm gonna say bigger fish in the around 20 pounds, they don't really hang out in schools as much. Usually you'll get just like 1 or 2 blow-ups, 1 or 2 bites, and that's it.
I think most people are going to tell you those 20-pounders don't hang out in schools too often anymore.
But the 10 to 20 pound fish class range, you could still find them in schools, but usually not as much. The schools are smaller the bigger the fish get. So if you're ever chasing those trophy ones, those ones are by themselves.
Let's just cut it right now. How are we going to catch these 10 to 20 pound fish?
These 10 to 20 pounds fish, they school up. It's no different than finding a school of shakers or a school of schoolies. The only difference is that you have to put in your time, and once you find them, usually the fish in that school are biting just like the schoolie size ones or the shakers one would. It's just about locating them, and the hardest part of striper fishing is locating fish.
Are you going to show us some of those big fish baits you got?
Yeah, I got some. Well, they're I don't even consider them big fish baits. They're just baits that I like throwing. I like throwing, you know, your standard cotton cordell pencil popper. This is a 6-inch. You could throw the 7-inch one. This one right here has caught me more fish every single year on Topwater than any other bait.
What hook do you have on?
This is an Owner ST41. This is a 2-time strong hook, and sometimes I still think it's not strong enough for these fish. I've contemplated using bigger, but this is my perfect balance that I found for
those are, you know, those are heavy.
Yeah, these are heavy duty hooks.
What are you using to set hook with those?
This right here, using a bass rod. I only use a 7-foot heavy with a 65-pound braid for this.
Okay, so you're able to really bear down on it.
I can really, you know, not worry about hooking fish and landing fish on a 7-foot heavy. I've caught actually quite a few teener fish on this specific setup.
Do you think that has, with those heavier hooks, it's going to sit lower in the water? Does that have a different action?
It does, and that's why I'm sticking with these 2-time strong. I feel like when I use the 3 times, it sinks too much. It sits lower in the water, and I don't want that. So, I mean, I've never had these 2 times owners straighten out on me yet, but it's one of those things I know if I hook a big one, it could definitely happen. So when it comes to topwater baits, outside of the pencil popper, your most effective baits are walking baits. And this is a Strike King Mega Dog. It's a pretty small bait. It's only 6 inches. I upgrade the hooks again. Owner 2-time strong with hyper wires. And you also throw like your Mega Bass, Mega Dog. These guys just provide a big profile for the fish.
Now, can you talk price? You know, a lot of people are worried about price, and I know one of those is a fairly expensive bait. One of them, talk about that a little bit.
So the first thing is you don't need an expensive bait to catch a striper. This Strike King here will run you about 20 bucks, and this Mega Dog here is going to run you about, I think, 40 bucks. Upgrade the hardware, it's another 5 bucks or something. But these lures right here catch them. I mean, I also throw lunker punkers and big, you know, garage bait companies, but the truth is these mass-produced baits catch me a lot of stripers. They work very well.
How about just a Magnum spook like we have? You know, it's not not quite that bulky, but you throw those, you catch fish on just big spooks.
I can throw a spook. I actually have a super spook. It's one of those super spook. It's a standard standby. I mean, but honestly, in the world of striper fishing, this is a very small bait. You can catch a lot of fish. I know some people who caught their PBs on this, but again, once again, you know, I upgrade every single striper bait I'm fishing. Stock hardware hardly holds up to fish unless it's a really strong bait or like a garage company bait that put a lot of money into their hardware.
And the price point on these is right around $10.
Yeah, these are like $10 lures, and these guys catch a lot of fish. This is the first topwater lure I started throwing and started catching stripers on. And last but not least, we're gonna talk about it because it's probably my favorite type of bait to throw. are these glide baits. You have like, this is the Baits Handy Antidote. This has caught me a lot of fish, but another popular one is the Sneaky Pete, the S-Waver, of course, Upgrade Hardware. These are a little more specialized baits, and I use a swim bait rod to throw them. Any standard swim bait rod will throw them. I use a Okuma Guide Select swim bait. It's their heavy model. It works really well. Glide baits are big baits, and they draw big bites. When you're throwing these things, you can catch a lot of schoolies, but you just have to know when you're throwing them. Don't expect a lot of bites like you would get on a jerkbait or a paddle tail. You're going out for a few bites, and you're going out for the right ones.
Are those, you're throwing those straight braid?
Yeah, these ones I throw straight 65 braid. I do not like a leader. I've tried leaders, 20, 30, 40 pound leaders. I just have not found leaders to be effective when striper fishing. In my experience, if your line is tied perfectly, your weakest spot is still your knot. And if you have a leader, you have two weak spots because you have the connection and the bait. So I just personally have not found leaders to be effective for striper fishing.
Okay, well, Joe, you know, that kind of, it's hard to, you know, cover everything in a short video like this, but we are going to go out when the fish come in, and you guys know kind of what Joe's looking at, what he's looking for, the baits that he's using. Nothing really special, but let's go out and film a couple of trips, and we'll talk about the cadence that you use. You can talk about how you're setting on these bigger fish, the speed that you're fishing, you know, more into detail of what's going on. And you know, until that time, maybe we can have Joe come on and you come out. We'll go bass fishing a little bit.
Yep.
And you know, it's just a matter of getting out on the water now. So we'll
Most
have
definitely.
hopefully some action footage coming up. Anything else you want to add there, Joe?
No, there's way too much striper stuff to cover in one video. You'll have to just keep an eye out for our next striper video, and soon enough, when the fall run comes in, we'll get out and we'll get on the water and get some.
Yeah, and if you haven't checked out Core Fishing, which is Joe's YouTube channel, he's got a lot of striper stuff already up on there. Unfortunately, I think when we go out, we're going to get a couple of our PBs, so, you know, I'll let you put that one up on yours too, and we'll share those. But anyhow, thank you guys for watching, and go out and catch some largemouth bass until the stripers come in, and then you'll see Joe back on. I'm sure you're going to see pictures of Joe sending me some bass pictures too, because he is a pretty good bass fisherman also. So thanks again, Joe.
All right, thanks for having me.
See you guys on the water. Good luck.